She didn't have much of a reaction. When she was informed that Charles was deceased, she had responded that she already knew. She appeared calm, very non-emotional, was kind of hanging out and seemed to be just having kind of some general conversation, not really upset, just kind of, at one point she was laughing, just kind of was standing around.
Well, Lori Vallow Daybell didn't appear distraught when her husband was murdered by her brother, perhaps even in front of her and her children. Instead of calling 911, she went shopping, grabbed some fast food, and returned to the murder scene nearly an hour later. Her comment was more of a joke to neighbors about how this murder might be perceived by them. The real question remains, does this odd behavior make Lori Daybell a murderer? Well, hey everybody, I'm coming to you live from England today at the day of coronation for King Charles. Now, the week at Lori Daybell's trial ended with a series of sex texts. They're all being called different things by different people. They were between Lori Vallow Daybell and Chad Daybell, leading up to Charles Vallow's death and then beyond. And we're going to hear more testimony on Monday when things kick off again. But what it clearly told me is that JJ, Tylee, Tammy Daybell, and Charles Vallow were all obstacles in this steamy love affair that Chad Daybell and Lori Daybell were having with each other. And in my opinion, it changes and removes all doubt that those kids were killed as collateral after the fact or after Charles' murder. Some have suggested that maybe they witnessed the murder of Charles and were killed to get rid of them as being witnesses. Well, these texts leading up to all of this suggest they viewed him as an obstacle long before those murders occurred. And to me, it says, and it brings out behaviors that suggest that it was all part of a conspiracy that was much, much deeper. Well, I'm coming to you from England and Stratford upon Avon. We're going to be heading over to London in a bit, but I wanted to just shout out before I leave because this is the home of William Shakespeare. It's in the northern Cotswolds, and the reason it's so significant to me is because of the play Hamlet. And in that play, there was a quote uttered by Queen Gertrude. Now, the reason this is also significant is because here in Shakespeare land, I couldn't keep Lori Daybell out of my mind, and that Hamlet play. It boils down to a comment made by Queen Gertrude in the play Hamlet. And this is why. In response to the insincere overreacting of Prince Hamlet, who was trying to prove that his uncle was guilty of killing his father, the King of Denmark, he made or has a comment that's made in there that I think is so important. So think of the testimony that we've heard in this case thus far, recited by people who heard different stories, different interpretations, different deflections made by Daybell. I just frankly can't stand it any longer, so I'm going to say the quote. "The lady doth protest too much, methinks." Isn't that perfect for what we were talking about? You see, like Hamlet, the prosecution is playing out a play within this play, trying to convince the jury that Lori Vallow Daybell is guilty of murder. And like the play, my impression is that Daybell repeated declarations of innocence, even victimization at times, by the rumors of others, saying, I'm being called really mean things, if you remember her testimony to police. Well, it's much the same as Gertrude's comment and the illusion of her lack of fidelity to her husband. In other words, Hamlet declares that her comments conveyed doubts about her truthfulness. And with that, I'm going to use a incorrect interpretation that I used to use in law enforcement from time to time to kind of restate this phrase in its slang. I'm going to just switch one word. Methinks the lady doth protest too much. Well, welcome to Profiling Evil. Like you, I've been glued to these tweets, reports, and commentary coming out of the Lori Daybell murder trial. It's going on in Boise, Idaho, just ended week 5, and holy cow, this thing gets goofier every single day. You know, I'm in Stratford-upon-Avon tonight, but I took a few moments to join Julie Grant on Court TV to talk about the Doomsday Mom cult case. And I wanted to share a couple of pieces from that. Again, this morning, I'm getting ready to head over. It's King Charles Coronation today. So it's been a busy, busy couple of weeks here in England, and I'm looking forward to getting home soon. But please take a moment, hit that like and subscribe button and ring the bell. You know, we focused our exploration when I was talking with Julie Grant on one of the reasons people seem to join cults. And it's all about the love bomb. And I talked about that in a previous video. But there are other reasons, and cult leaders are pros at figuring out where our weaknesses are, those chinks in our armor, to use an English phrase. And the strategy can be entirely different person to person. Now, I haven't spoken to anybody who isn't a little shook up about the Lori Vallow Daybell nonchalant behavior that she exhibited outside of her Arizona home shortly after her brother Alex gunned down Charles. Now, in fact, we learned during this trial that she actually witnessed the murder of her husband. Perhaps Tylee witnessed it. Now, it sounds like JJ was outside by all accounts, but instead of calling 911, or instead of checking the pulse of her husband or seeing if Alex is okay after this horrible assault that was going on according to testimony, instead, she goes, packages up JJ, says, hey, let's go get some supplies over at the pharmacy. And hey, let's go over and get you breakfast at the local fast food restaurant. And then she takes him to school. An hour later, she returns back to the murder scene and approaches police. And that's where she's caught on film saying that infamous, hi neighbors, sorry, while laughing about what was going on there. Well, I joined Julie Grant on Court TV to talk about the Doomsday Mom cult case and her murder trial. We were joined by a criminal defense attorney named John Mobley. Great guy, and our discussion centered around the odd behavior that Lori was exhibiting at the time the murder occurred of Charles Vallow and when she was talking with police. During the discussion, I was invited to share how the Daybell cult compares to other cults that I've investigated during my career. Let's listen to that little segment.
Utah retired police commander and the host of the Profiling Evil podcast, Mike King, is with us. And in Columbia, South Carolina, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor John Mobley is with us as well. Here, Lori Vallow Daybell, wow, the goddess, Alex Cox, the angel, zombies. They said the kids were. You can't make this stuff up. It is wild to many of our wonderful courties who are watching at home, saying, "Have you ever heard of anything like this?" Commander King, I want to go to you first because one of my Court TV colleagues said that in your years of service, which we thank you for, you have some experience investigating cults and cult-like behavior. How does this compare to what you've seen before, please, Commander?
It's really interesting, Julie. As different as these groups would like to think they are so much alike. And so when we start picking apart the cult characteristics, the behavioral aspects, the things that they do to control their membership, the things they do to recruit, the way in which they take scripture and other sayings and pick out pieces and parts to fit the narrative that they need and want is so similar. It's almost comical at times if it wasn't such a horrific kind of a thing. And what we're seeing in these destructive cults, and there are cults out there that probably I mean, I guess we could call Major League Baseball a cult. We're talking destructive cults. We're talking these groups that are led by usually one leader, sometimes two, like we're seeing in this particular case. And everything points to them. All of the benefits go to them. All of the guidance comes from them. And here's what's really interesting as you talk about things today. And that is, and I'm going to just put this in terms that I've used before and from predators that I've talked to before, is that these leaders are generally not as frightening to me as the number 2 or the number 3 in the group, where in this particular case, if they're found guilty, Lori and Chad are the voice of God. And then they turn around and then they get some person hyped up in the belief system, like Alex Cox in this particular case, that they deem as the arm of God. And so they come up with these wacky revelations, and then they bring out their henchmen to take care of things.
It is truly despicable what is being alleged here, as you both know. Commander, thank you for all of that.
Well, I've mentioned my personal opinion a number of times on this program, and my personal opinion that I'm much more concerned about the cult member who's the number 2 or the number 3 in the organization than necessarily the leader in these cults. Now, the leader comes up with the wacky ideas and the notions. In this case, Charles came up with this grading system of whether people were light or dark spirits. But boy, I'll tell you, that didn't slow down Lori, according to testimony, to coming up with those same kinds of skills and determinations on other people. But you know what? It's usually the follower, in my experience, that is the one that acts out these wacky revelations or dictates from the leaders. So think about extreme cases like Charles Manson and the 4 followers who went out and committed the Tate LeBlanc murders. It wasn't Charles Manson. He came up with the idea, but they went out and acted out the thing. Well, not to be outdone, several more of the people, including Manson, joined the following night in committing 2 more murders. So he did get in on the act there. But I think about my interviews with Dan Lafferty and his brother Ron Lafferty, who were ritual killers who murdered their sister-in-law and her 14-month-old baby Erica in this ritualistic, horrible murder. And you can watch that on Profiling Evil by just going back and looking up Dan Lafferty, or you might remember it from the Netflix Under the Banner of Heaven. But in that case, Dan personally explained to me that he considered it an honor to act out his brother's commands. In fact, after the horrific homicide occurred, Dan told me that as they got into the car after slitting the throats of this young mother and her baby, that Ron turned to him, Dan, and said, "Hey, thanks for killing those 2 kids, because I don't think I could have done it." To which Dan proudly says, I said, "Hey, sure, no problem." Can you imagine? Well, as we reflect on how Daybell turned on the charm with those police officers outside the home where Charles was killed, or how she then rambled on when Rexburg police were trying to do the welfare check for JJ, I want you to think about this response I had on Court TV.
We just moved in here a few weeks ago.
Gotcha. How long have you guys lived here?
I'm sorry?
How long have you lived here?
Like 3 weeks.
Oh, geez. Yeah, okay.
That's why the neighbors don't know us.
Gotcha.
Like, hi, neighbor, sorry.
Let me bring in my guests now, see what they think. Retired police commander and the host of the Profiling Evil podcast, Mike King, and criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor John Mobley. Okay, Commander, want to get your assessment. If you were in that room doing the interview with Cult Mom, what would you be thinking, please?
Well, what I'd be thinking is let this person run with the story that she's creating, because every time there's a question that you can see her kind of working out how she's going to make up the next answer to this. I think it's really interesting as she went through this process, you can see her constantly trying to turn on the charismatic approach and trying to kind of win over. I found it really interesting, and I think it would be really powerful if they would bring to point some things like really tearing apart her comments and her statement there, Julie, about, hey, look how I sacrificed and I uprooted our children to go to Houston because if by uprooting them, I was pulling them from family and friends. Well, what about today when she decided to move them to Rexburg, Idaho overnight and pull away this child who's struggling with the loss of his adopted father, his service animal, and sticking him in a house, and the list goes on and on. It's so frustrating.
That's a great point, Commander. And do you think that all of this moving about was in an attempt to evade police detection, perhaps?
In my opinion, absolutely. And of course, she can come up with all kinds of reasoning. Not only that, but to be with the love of her life now, Chad Daybell, to go to where they have together as co-conspirators in this cult, start to create this new Zion where they're going to bring everyone together. And when the apocalypse happens, they're going to be protected. And you start putting all these pieces together of Alex Cox going out and buying weapons and stockpiling them and moving there and telling Zulema, you got to move here, and trying to get their friend from Hawaii to move there. All of this just points to the fact that this was all part of a much bigger scheme.
Appreciate it, Commander.
Well, hey, folks, I'm pausing to share some concerns I have surrounding identity theft and fraud. I've learned a lot from our partner, Aura. They're the pros at protecting people from cyber predators. Aura provides identity theft protection, credit and fraud protection, and online and device security for you and your family. They taught me to think twice before answering those online questionnaires designed to steal our personal information. It must be working because U.S. statistics show that 33% of us have been victimized by identity theft at an annual cost of more than $56 billion each year. Aura protection plans come with around-the-clock support, a money-back guarantee, and $1 million theft policy. But here's the best part. You can try Aura for free by clicking on this special Profiling Evil link in the description down below. When you do, we get a small commission. But think about it. You insure your car and you insure your house. Don't you think it's time to insure your identity? Now let's get back to today's discussion. I decided to include Defense Attorney John Mobley's response to my comment, suggesting that the opinion of law enforcement is to look for hidden meaning in comments that are said. And he cautioned that that really can lead to problems. And in part, he's correct. But it's more important to understand as an investigator the things that aren't being said than necessarily the things that are being verbalized. And it may not be anything nefarious. I really want to agree with John that great care needs to be taken when investigating these cases, when getting statements, admissions, or even confessions from murder suspects.
Attorney John Mobley, tell me what you were thinking as you're watching Cult Mom give that interview and tell all those stories. Oh.
Well, I think the first thing I want to comment on is some of the perceptions about her conduct and the statement she made. I've been doing this for a long time. I've been a prosecutor. I've prosecuted violent crimes and dealt with, psychopaths and narcissists, and I've defended a lot of them as well. But one thing I see that is common, when I address some of these comments is that oftentimes, and I tell this to juries all the time, law enforcement, when they suspect someone of being involved in a crime, every pause in their speech, every action they cannot explain, anytime they stammer, anything they do that is inconsistent with what they normally do or what they think somebody would do is in their mind evidence the person's guilty. And that's just how law enforcement is wired to think when it comes to suspects, okay? From my standpoint, I would agree this woman's a nut. I would agree that she's not going to get Mom of the Year. I think women are not going to like her or appreciate her behavior. But if you take away the fact that she's accused of murder and just look at what the behavior is, being remarried a lot, moving around a lot, being flighty. Most celebrities have that kind of lifestyle, and they get more followers for it. So, again, I think you want to separate this behavior from what she's accused of. Yeah, she's animated and nut, but they're not producing a Netflix special. They're trying to convict this woman of murder. So from a defense standpoint, What I'm looking at is, okay, let's get beyond the bizarre behavior. Let's get beyond the fact that she's married all the time. Hey, where's the evidence of the crime? Where are the admissions of guilt? Where are the facts that only the killer would know about? That's what I'm looking for.
Well, that's why it's so important that investigators not make decisions on a single form of evidence. We've talked about it before, that there are multiple forms of evidence and that they need to be brought together as theories are developed. Now, while Lori was making these statements that could be misconstrued or even misunderstood, it's important to realize that when they're combined together with the other traditional forms of evidence, that they add this incredible weight to what's going on and they corroborate each other, and they have to be considered to be more reliable than otherwise. So folks, from Stratford upon Avon, what are your thoughts on this one? We're going to be exploring cult behaviors throughout the course of this. I'm going to be back on Court TV next week, and hopefully I'm going to make it up to the trial for one of the days. Make sure you're checking out our Chad and Lori Daybell's story map. Hey folks, it's Mike from Profiling Evil, and I want to just take a quick minute to remind you about the Chad and Lori Daybell story map. You can find it at profilingevil.com under story maps, and I hope you'll go over and visit it. It gives you a chance to go through and kind of explore this case from beginning to end. Has all kinds of information about those first hearings, about what happened. But then I think one of the things that's pretty dang cool is it goes in and it talks about them individually. Not only has an overview, but it has a way to check out more about Lori, her former husbands, where she lived, Chad and his former wife, Tammy, and the circumstances leading up to her death. You can learn more about what light and dark is, according to them, and actually hear Chad speaking at one of those Preparing a People conferences. You can go into other family members like Stacy Cope, Joseph Ryan, Charles Vallow, Alex Cox, JJ and Tylee. You can look at the court processes, and you can get a little more information about Profiling Evil. So again, I hope you'll go back and check that out. Now let's get back to the program. And please make sure you're hitting that like and subscribe button so that you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. And please consider joining our channel memberships. My personal favorite is the Academy level, where you get a whole lot more for just a little bit more, and your financial donation really helps us pull things off here at Profiling Evil. Hey folks, if you like podcasts, I want to just say we were thrilled this week to receive notification that Profiling Evil podcast has now got 100,000 subscribers. That's on the audio side. And of course, we just broke 160,000 subscribers here on YouTube. So we're just thrilled and grateful for all of your support. But if you like podcasts, please make sure you're subscribing to Profiling Evil podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. And make sure you're checking us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and here on YouTube. You can also, again, find us on your favorite podcast platform. So from England, on the day of King Charles' coronation, thanks so much for your support of Profiling Evil. We'll see you all soon at the next crime scene.